Hi, boys and girls. We're back with The Thief of Always. And today we're going to be reading chapter 8 called Hungry Waters. I think back to chapter 7 and what Harvey wished for, the ark, and the animals. And it kind of looks like there's fish around. That first day in the holiday house, with all of its seasons and its spectacles, set the pattern for many that were to follow. When Harvey woke up the following morning, the sun once again pouring through a crack in the curtains, but this time it lay in a warm pool on the pillow beside him. He sat up with a shout and a smile, and either one or the other, and sometimes both, remained on his lips for the rest of the day. There was plenty to do, work on the treehouse in the spring morning, followed by food and the laying of plans for the afternoon, games and lazy hours in the heat of the summer, sometimes with Wendell, sometimes with Lulu, and then adventures by the light of the harvest moon. And finally, when the winter wind had blown out the flames and the pumpkin heads and carpeted the ground with snow, chilly fun for them, all out in the frosty air, and a warm Christmas welcome when they were done. It was a day of holidays. The third, as fine as the second, as the fourth, as fine as the third, and very soon Harvey began to forget that there was a dull world out beyond the wall, where the great gray beast February was still sleeping its tedious sleep. His only real reminder of the life he'd left, besides a second telephone call he had made to his mom and dad just to tell them all was well, was the present he had wished for and received that first Christmas, his ark. He thought about several times of trying it out on the lake to see if it would float, but it wasn't until the afternoon of the seventh day that he got around to doing so. Wendell had made a real glutton of himself at lunch and had declared that it was far too hot to play, so Harvey wandered down to the lake on his own. With the ark tucked under his arm, he half hoped, in fact, to find Lulu down there to keep him company, but the banks of the lake were empty. Once he laid his eyes on the gloomy waters, he almost gave up on the idea of a launching, but that meant admitting something to himself that he didn't wish to admit. So he headed on down to the shore, found a rock to perch on that looked less precarious than the others, and set his ark on the water. It floated well, he was pleased to see. He pushed it to and fro for a little while, then lifted it out, peered inside to see if it was leaking. It was quite a watertight. However, he set it back on the lake and pushed it out again, and as he did so, he caught sight of a fish rising from the bottom of the lake, its mouth open wide as if it intended to swallow his little vessel whole. He reached out to snatch the ark from the water before it was either sunk or devoured, but in his haste he lost his footing on the slime-slickened rock, and with a cry, he fell into the lake. The water was icy cold and eager. It quickly closed over his head. He flailed wildly, trying not to imagine the dark depths beneath him, or the vast maw of the fish that had been rising from those depths. Turning his face toward the surface, he started to swim. He could see his ark floating above him, capsized by his fall. Its lead passengers were already sinking. He didn't try to save them, but surfaced gasping for breath and paddled toward the shore. It wasn't much of a distance. In less than a minute, he was hauling himself up on the rocks and scrambling away from the bank, water pouring from his sleeves and trousers and shoes. Only when his feet were clear of the lake and no hungry fish could snap at his toes did he drop down onto the ground. Though it was midsummer and the sun was blazing somewhere overhead, the air around the lake was cold, and he soon began to shiver. Before he made his way out into the sun, however, he looked for some sign of his ark. The spot where it had sunk was marked by a forlorn flotilla of wreckage, all of which could soon join the rest of the ark at the bottom. Of the fish that had seemed so eager to devour him, there was no sign. Perhaps it had swum down into the depths to chew on the drowned menagerie. If so, Harvey hoped it choked on its dinner. He lost plenty of toys before. He had a brand new bicycle, his prized possession, stolen from the steep of his house 2 birthdays ago. But this loss upset him as much. More, in fact. The idea that the lake had now taken something he owned was somehow worse than a thief running off with his bike. A thief was warm, fresh, and blood. The lake was not. His possessions had gone into a nightmare place, full of monstrous things, and he felt as though a little part of himself had gone with it down into the dark. He walked away from the lake without looking back, but the breeze that came to warm his face when he broke in through the thicket and the sound of birds that pleased his ear could not keep from his mind the thought he had tried to ignore when he had gone down to the water. Despite all entertainments that the holiday house supplied so eagerly, it was a haunted place. And however hard he had tried to ignore his doubts and suppress his questions, they could be ignored and suppressed no longer. Whoever, or whatever, that haunter was, Harvey could not be content now until he had seen its face and knew its nature. Boys and girls, that is the end of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 tomorrow.